Two things today. The prelim is out on the Cessna 205 crash that happened at Cleburne, and that was the subject of the video last week. And there's some things that to clear up from that previous video, so we could talk about that. Also, the final report is out for the 27 August 2021 crash of the A36 on takeoff at Redding, California. I did a video on that accident back in September of 2020. So, yeah, that's right. Stick with me on FlyWire and we'll see what they come up with. Hi, I'm Scott Perdue, and today on FlyWire we're going to take a deeper dive into that final report of the A36 takeoff accident 27 months ago at Redding, California. But first I want to update the Cessna 205 crash at Cleburne, Texas, just a little over a week ago. I'm not a fan of rushing out to an accident site and reviewing an accident soon after it all happens. I'd rather have all the facts that the NTSB has access to, at least in the prelim. I'm not a reporter, and I'm not covering a story per se. I review accidents that have learning points for pilots. That's what I'm interested in. Accident situations that any of us could easily find ourselves in and have to deal with. So that's what I want to do, is get some lessons learned. So let's get to it. The ADS-B data that the FAA has access to is far more in-depth than what we can get from FlightWire, FlightRadar 24, or even ADS-B Exchange. The FAA has 1 second data, and they keep it forever. A lot of what the NTSB discovered was from the ADS-B data that's not readily available to the public. And I took a look at it. The only really good one was ADS-B Exchange, which is inlet data, which is not the government. The aircraft departed Fairmont, West Virginia at 11:16 Eastern Standard Time, or 10:16 Central Standard Times, with the final destination of Granbury and Texas. And from here on, I'm going to use Central Standard Times. The ADS-B revealed that they had stopped at Buckhannon, West Virginia at 10:33 and then departed at 11:09. They returned right away at 11:15, and the fueling records indicate that they took 41.5 gallons of fuel at 10:42 and then an additional 17 gallons at 11:20, and I'm rounding. So hold on a second here. That means that they first landed with about 7 gallons of fuel. Galena Peak, the 550 burns about 15 gallons per hour in cruise. That's not taxi, takeoff, and climb. So at this point, I think we can reliably say they were running skosh on fuel. At 11:33, they departed again, landing at Covington, Tennessee at 15:27, and then departed there at 16:15, and then landed at Cleburne, Texas at 20:22. These flights were apparently all VFR flights. No mention of IFR was made. And if you watch my previous video, you might remember that the accident aircraft passed within 4 miles of me, right where I'm standing right now, at 2,800 feet, about an hour before the landing at Cleburne. And it was maybe a quarter mile in fog. And the ceiling was way less than 500 feet. It was terrible weather. There was IMC. They proceeded to fly to Cleburne and followed the RNAV 33 approach course almost exactly, not in altitude, but in the course. The reported weather was, at the time, 1/4 mile in fog and 200-foot overcast. The approach was not under IFR. Incontrovertibly, it was IMC. So after taking on 20 gallons of fuel at Cleburne, the crew then filed an IFR flight plan and called for a clearance. The clearance was to fly 090 heading and climb to 3,000 feet. The aircraft departed from CPT at 20:55, and no radio communications were received by ATC at all. Only that telephone call for the clearance. This is an important fact not available in the first video. And finally, they did file for IFR. The clearance would require a 60-degree left turn after takeoff. After departure, the aircraft climbed to an altitude of 1,775 feet and began a right turn, not a left turn. Turning through about 240 degrees, the airplane began a rapid descent. The last data point was at 1,275 feet MSL, about 505 feet above the ground. The airplane impacted the ground on a 340-degree ground track, right wing low, and I surmised almost the reciprocal of that at 176. I didn't know about the complete turn. The main wreckage was located about 80 feet from the initial impact point, with a total debris field of about 240 feet. The wreckage was mostly consumed by fire. There was surveillance video about 3/4 of a mile from the accident location that captured the audio of the takeoff and the audio video of the impact. It was about 1.5 miles from the airport where the crash site was. No abnormal engine sounds were observed. A witness located about 300 yards southeast in a housing development stated that the airplane appeared at a low altitude in a right bank at a high rate of speed just before the impact. He stated the engine sounded as if it were at high power setting. The airplane and engine inspection, they did that already, revealed no contributing discrepancies. The vacuum pump exhibited no pre-impact anomalies, and the recorded weather they put on the prelim as was it, 1/2 mile and 300 overcast. Yeah. I think that spatial disorientation is still the most likely issue that confronted these pilots. What I said at the time in the last video, there are a host of contributory factors that could have aided that. Things like attitude indicator failure, distractions in the cockpit, task prioritization, things like that. There even the possibility of a hasty return to the airport. No facts that would support any of that, but that's all possibilities. Some things here we're never going to know. I suspect some discrepancy with the recorded weather and the actual weather if the surveillance video was so blurred by fog that you couldn't even read the N number on the airplane at 100 feet. That matches the original report of 1/4 mile in fog and 200 over. Low clouds at night is nothing trivial to take off into, especially with a minimally equipped airplane. Spatial D, I empathize with, and I've made several videos on this topic, so I'm not going to go into it here. Go see those. I have a playlist for that. What troubles me here is the previous flights and apparent disregard for the rules of flying in clouds. But the biggest takeaway, in my opinion, is that just because a thing is legal does not make it smart or the safest thing to do. As I noted in the previous video, an Uber ride to Granbury is only 20 minutes. It may be inconvenient, but look at the result. And these were two fairly experienced pilots with recent experience. So, what can you say? To paraphrase a Clint Eastwood comment in a movie is, you got to ask yourself the question, do you feel lucky? Luck, and from my perspective, luck is not a strategy. But your mileage may vary. So enough of that. Let's talk about this A36 final report at Reading. The A36 accident happened at 06:30 in the morning at Benton Airfield in Reading, California. 4 people were on board the airplane as it attempted its unsuccessful takeoff. The runway is 2,420 feet. 2 of the people on board were killed in the crash, and the other 2 were critically injured, including burns, and then died at a later date, which is a real shame. Witnesses described the sequence of events, and two separate security cameras confirmed important aspects of that fateful takeoff roll. We're going to take a look at that video here in a few minutes, or less. But in the meantime, let's talk about the sequence of events. The mishap pilot intended to fly the airplane to a destination just north of Reading, relatively speaking, on an out and back. He was going to come back. He had the 3 passengers aboard the airplane, and the right seat passenger was a CFI, but he was unfamiliar with the A36. He had no Bonanza time at all. The day before the accident, the pilot spent considerable time planning the flight, and he was given the weight of the passengers. He also spent a lot of time trying to figure out his takeoff performance. From the testimony of the refueler, it appears that he put fuel in the airplane to the bottom of the tab. This would equate to about 30 gallons on each side. 54 would be usable. The takeoff was done early in the morning, and I don't think DA was much of a factor. Elevation's, 723 feet anyway. So I don't think it had a minimal effect. Temperatures were not bad. A witness reported that the airplane appeared to be accelerating slowly and that it suddenly rotated and then appeared to lift off slightly, settle back to the runway, and continue. The airplane continued and then suddenly rotated a second time, but did not climb. It got a little bit in the air, and it rolled down the runway with the nose high in the air. He estimated that the the airplane was doing about 60 to 65 knots as it passed by him in a nose high attitude. The security footage shows that the airplane rotated about 1,700 feet down the runway with 700 feet remaining. And then continuing nose high, it climbed briefly in that nose high attitude about 300 feet from the end of the runway, settling back to the runway about 2 seconds later. The airplane then departed the runway on the ground at full power, with a fireball developing shortly after it disappeared from the camera's view. The airplane was equipped with a turbo-normalized system. This is an excellent STC that allows cruise performance numbers of 195 to as much as 210. I've seen 217 before in a TN system. The standard STC allows a 350-pound gross weight increase to bring the airplane from 365 to 4,000 pound gross. This airplane also had an air conditioner and a weather radar. In short, it was a very heavy airplane, over 2,820 pounds, empty weight. In the docket, the weight and balance computations were done for the investigation and are available there. The A36 empty weight, as I said, was 2,820 pounds with 694 pounds of passengers. That puts the zero fuel weight at 3,653 pounds. The fuel is calculated at 54 gallons and 324 pounds, bringing the total to 3,977 pounds, roughly 23 pounds under gross. What is unclear to me is whether the weight in the calculation is the empty weight or the basic empty weight. The basic empty weight includes unusable fuel, and the empty weight does not. Typically, there's a 6 gallons of unusable fuel equaling about 36 pounds. I guess in reality, that 36 pounds would not be a huge impact on the airplane one way or the other. But it's picking nits. Regardless, the specific weight of the airplane, for all intents and purposes, was at or above the maximum gross weight allowed by the STC. It's unknown just where the passengers in the rear were located. One of them weighed 279 pounds. And why that's important is the location of the CG was out of bounds on 4 of the 7 possible seating configurations. The actual CG would impact the airplane or the speed at which the airplane would be able to rotate, fly, and climb. So here's where it gets complicated. The temperature was above the standard temperature, resulting in a 4.5% increase in takeoff distance. Additionally, the aircraft was subject to an increase in takeoff distance by 6% due to the incorporation of certain factory modifications on the airplane. So far, that means we have about a 10.5% increase in takeoff distance. With the turbo-normalizer STC and gross weights of 4,000 pounds, you have to increase the takeoff distance by up to another 30%. This puts the runway required for takeoff at 1,978 feet and the 50-foot obstacle number at 3,558 feet. Recall that runway 34, or now it's 33, is 2,420 feet long. The VASI was set at a 3.5 degree angle, and the favored runway was 33 for noise abatement, and you should climb to 1,500 feet before turning on runway 33. So what's that? That's like just over 700 feet above the ground. The NTSB found that the probable cause of the crash to be pilot's failure to recognize the airplane's inadequate takeoff performance, that slow acceleration, and abort the takeoff given the length of the runway. That accel stop distance is critical, and I talked a lot about it in my first video on this. The question is, could the airplane, as it was loaded, take off in the available runway? And the answer is a tentative yes. Given the fact that to clear a 50-foot obstacle required 1,580 feet, or 80% of the distance required to take off, means that the climb rate would have been about 100 feet per minute range to clear that obstacle. That's staggering into the air. And it would have taken nearly 30 seconds to get above 50 feet. It's forever. The mishap pilot had 463 total hours of pilot experience, 38.3 in the accident airplane. The rest of the experience was 424.7 hours in a 150, Cessna 150. He apparently had some sort of checkout with 27.5 hours of dual in the Bonanza and 10.8 hours of solo. There is more dual than I deduced in my original video, and interviews revealed that the pilot had spent quite a lot of time reviewing the takeoff and determined that he could do it with restricted fuel. I mentioned that, sorry. Importantly, the accelerate stop distance was about 3,400 feet, or 1,000 feet past the runway, the paved runway. So that would be a fairly early decision about the airplane's not performing. It might be hard to do. To successfully take off on this runway with that load, on that day, the takeoff roll would have had to be done perfectly without any hiccup or mechanical issue. All that is pretty marginal in my book. Let's look at the video from the two security cameras. It would appear that the pilot's checkout program did not cover the takeoff performance issues of a turbo-normalized A36 near sea level, or basic technique for that matter. The turbo does not equate to increased thrust, and a real impact on takeoff performance must be taken into account. It is absolutely critical in a heavy airplane like that. The American Bonanza Society has an excellent training program for all flavors of Bonanzas, so if you're interested in learning that, to fly your Bonanza or learning to fly Bonanzas, check them out, bonanza.org. They do a great job. The vast majority of this pilot's time is in a Cessna 150. So the jump from a 150 to a turbo-normalized A36 with AC radar is a very long one for any pilot, much less one with no retract or high-performance experience. The A36 is about twice as fast as that 150, and well, I want to say over twice the weight. I did takeoff performance testing with a heavyweight A36 and found that pulling the yoke aft during the roll, as this pilot did, raising the nose high, would create a plowing situation that would result in an increase of takeoff roll by as much as 70%. 70%. You're not going to get off the ground faster. It's going to take much longer. This is over and above the long roll the airplane would have experienced at the actual given load if the perfect technique was followed. Plus, don't forget that dollop of luck, that no hiccups or mechanical problems, or all those things are required to make the takeoff in the first place. Any little issue would have been a problem. So what are the lessons that we can glean from this accident? I think the most glaring one here is that even if you feel like you're in a hurry, a thorough checkout and experience with all systems in the airplane is an absolute must. Remember the witness saying that the airplane was accelerating slower than normal? A critical thing. One thing you may not realize is that if the pilot had deployed the AC and turned it on, because it was summertime, and turned it on, that alone would have absorbed so much power as to prevent a successful takeoff on that runway at that day, all by itself. The AC switch must be off and the evaporator stowed. That's when I teach in that airplane, those kind of airplanes, I hammer that. Taking the runway, that's off, because we want to survive. Given the challenges of the takeoff, I'm not saying that that's what happened, but it could be. Given the challenges of the takeoff on this runway, The best course of action would have been to meet the passengers at Reading Airport. It was less than 6 miles away, and RDD has a 7,000-foot runway, more than enough for a gross weight takeoff. He still would have had restricted fuel because he just had people, and he was great gross weight. I think that would be my go-to solution rather than betting on a perfect takeoff roll with perfect technique. There just wasn't enough room to accelerate to takeoff speed of 75 knots and then decide to stop. You're going to be off the runway, and that to me is not a viable choice. That does bring up the question of how would or could you make the decision that the airplane was not performing normally and that you should abort the takeoff. One of the techniques is to use a reference at the airport, a sign, a taxiway, to judge acceleration. Another technique is the 50-70 rule, or the 70-50 rule, however you want to say it. That means that you check that you've reached 70% of your takeoff speed by 50% of the runway. The technique I use is timing. I know just how long it takes my airplane to accelerate to takeoff speed. And you can vary that by temperature or DA, how much that impacts that. My F-33C takes about 9 to 10 seconds to accelerate to 63 knots. That's the takeoff speed there. A typical A36 takeoff speed is 73 knots. There's the difference between the airplanes. And Whiskey Bravo, which is my A36, it took 13 seconds to accelerate to that speed. I don't have my takeoff speed. If I don't have my takeoff speed by that time, I abort and figure out what went wrong. That's my technique. You use yours. The objective is to abort the roll in time to stop on the available runway. That was the whole idea, so you can reuse the airplane and not get hurt doing it. Learning a workable technique for you is important to do and to practice. Okay. On a side note, the passenger in the right seat was a CFI with 339 total hours. None in a Bonanza, as I said earlier. There is a possibility that there could have been a factor in this accident. It's conceivable that the pilot, who was a low-time pilot, deferred to the CFI or subconsciously cross-checked his actions and intentions against the reaction of the CFI, which apparently was approval. One would assume that the CFI didn't say anything, therefore the pilot pressed on with his takeoff thinking it was just fine. He wasn't doing that pilot stuff. So that's what you need to do. You have to be the pilot in command. Lots of power won't trump the physics of the situation. Heavyweight operations are nothing to trifle with. Never stop learning and add in a reality dose of what if. What if this happens? What if that happens? How do I fix this? Or what am I going to do if? I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, hit like and subscribe. It looks a bit like this here. I'd also like to thank my Patreon supporters here. Without you guys, with your support, it'd be a little hard to do this. And if you'd like to support the channel, I'll leave a link below if you'd like to do that. And I just started a new series called The Big Metal Box. I'm going to live in a big metal box. I'm building a hangar with an apartment in it, and it's going to be off-grid and all that other stuff. So if you want to see that, it's only going to be on Patreon. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time on FlyWire.